a time for every matter under the heavens. The Jewish days of awe, spanning the months of late summer to fall, are a time of many seasons. On this journey through the key days of awe, our soul will awaken to itself. We will venture from innocence to sin and back to innocence again. We will embark on a journey from denial to awareness, from self-deception to self-awareness. We'll experience the holy nature of our own humanity. We will move from self-judgment to self-forgiveness, from anger to healing, from hard-heartedness to brokenheartedness. This is the journey the soul takes to transform itself and to evolve, the journey from boredom and staleness to renewal. The journey through the days of awe heals. If you open yourself to them, these holy days will carry you home. The journey is about the inner spirit, about the power of the interdependent whole. Sigmund Freud introduced the single great idea upon which all significant developments in the 20th century were based, that the invisible is more powerful than the visible. Today, we seek to make the invisible, our remembrances, our prayers, our desire and gratitude for forgiveness, closer to our being. These are the invisible threads that tie us to our own humanity, that connect us to one another. Today's rituals carry with them the power of transformation, the transformation when our hearts lament, the transformation that comes through celebration, the transformation that comes through forgiving and being forgiven. Judaism tells us that Yom Kippur itself atones. We simply receive. Come, let us enter into these holy times together. We begin with Elul, with the great horn of remembrance. When it is sounded, it begins the month of introspection that precedes the days of awe. Let us welcome this time of introspection with the sound of our shofar. Let its sound move through you, resonate in you, open in you. When we remember the joys and sorrows of life. For the Jewish people, there is no joy matched by the times when we are fully connected to the holy and to humanity. There's no sorrow to exceed when we are estranged from God, from humanity, from our own better natures. The Jewish people remember distinctly and particularly the wholeness found in connection. They speak of the wilderness period after exile as a time of solidarity, connection, interdependence with each other. They speak of the wilderness as a time when they could depend on God, when forgiveness was offered, gifts received, and the word and presence of God was as close as the breath in your mouth. God was there in the world with them, and they knew it was good. The ancient Israelites felt this particularly. Of all the ancient civilizations, they were perhaps the only one that did not form near a river that sustained them. They depended more on the life-giving rains, the warmth of the sun, the strength of the soil. They knew God in all of these places and have continued to see God in the natural world and in the temperaments of the weather. Ibn Ezra writes, "I see you in the starry field. I see you in the harvest yield. In every breath, in every sound, an echo of your name is found. The blade of grass, the simple flower, bear witness to your matchless power. In wonder workings or some bush aflame, men looking for God and fancy him concealed. But in earth's common things he stands revealed, while grass and flowers and stars spell out his name. They sanctified this sense of closeness by building a temple, a literal home for Yahweh to live in their midst. On Tish B'Av, the beginning of the Jewish days of awe, Jews remember that destruction of that temple, the place of God residing within them. And they remember that day as the moment when they began to feel true estrangement of humanity from God. They live into this moment and remember the destruction of the temple with lament in their hearts, but they also recognize something else, that this was not merely a moment in the past, but rather that every moment in our lives, the sacred house of our life, the constructs by which we live, by which we hold on to so fiercely, nevertheless fall away. So the walls of our great house are crumbling all the time. According to the Talmud, on Tish B'Av, we don't simply mourn the temple, but rather the whole series of calamities and the moments of pain, both before that temple destruction and long after it. And we recognize how that pattern of destruction, of falling apart, of estrangement, are so a part of our lives today. We know these too well. Sometimes I think when I read the paper, I just can't take that in right now. There are so many things we just can't take in, and that we don't even take time to name in this space. But if we did, they would render our heart. And so Tish B'Av is about a time of letting our heart be broken. It's about recognizing the wars that have and are still ending life, about the petty fears and the ignorance that grow too often into hatred and violence. It's about the crimes of greed and discrimination and exclusion. On this day, we are meant to wonder about those patterns and wonder about our role in them. Have we been complacent in those patterns of injustice and loss? This month in particular, thinking about how the Jews see God so much in nature, I wonder about how Harvey and Irma and Jose, how all those hurricanes might be telling us that humanity is out of alignment with this world. Is the world not thrashing in pain, calling for us to be back into right relationship with our interdependent, glorious world? So let's be honest, every week calamities wreck our heart. But let us open ourselves today for this moment into the fullness of the heartbreak that we keep at bay. Let us name the pains of the world, personal and prophetic. Grief for the planet and humanity. The grief you feel for the loved ones you have lost or are losing. This is the time to lament the hopes you had for yourself or your family or the world, the hopes that you have come to recognize you will see will not be realized. I invite you now to name those laments out loud or in the silence of your heart. For every moment, there's a season. Tish B'Av is a time of soul searching, a time of aching. Tish B'Av is the moment of turning, the moment when we turn away from denial and begin to face exile and alienation as they manifest themselves in our lives, in our alienation and estrangement from God, in our alienation from ourselves and from others. The point of this is that we journey into and out of estrangement. Remember, when we experience sorrow, we yearn again for joy. Longing develops only when one has lost something precious. It is the birth pains of our commitment to build a new life. For untold generations on Rosh Hashanah, our ancestors listened to the sound of the shofar. What did they hear in its piercing tones? What solemn truths did they detect in its calls, which stirred them so profoundly each year? What does the shofar say to us today as we stand at the dawn of a new year, groping for a light to guide us and a faith to sustain us? May the sound of the shofar penetrate our souls. May the sound of the shofar shatter our complacency. May the sound of the shofar break any impulses towards anger, cruelty, or apathy. May the sound of the shofar summon us to service, stir us to respond as Abraham did, "Here I am." May the sound of the shofar recall the moment when we are moved to live our lives according to our 7 principles. May the sound of the shofar become a jubilant shout of joy. May the sound of the shofar enter our hearts, for blessed is the people who hearken to its call. The shofar is call and response, grief answered by joy. It is judgment answered with mercy and new life. It is the call that starts Rosh Hashanah. There's an old rabbinic story about a teacher who gathered his students together. And he shared a question. Often teachings in Judaism come a place when a teacher asks his students a question to answer. And he said, we talk about Rosh Hashanah as fear answered by hope, death answered by new life, the darkness answered by the new day. So tell me, as we move from the darkness of the night into the new day, when does the dawn come? How do you know that moment that separates the darkness from the light? When comes the dawn? The students had been studying, and they consulted the books of Deuteronomy and looked at the precise nature of the laws that distinguish what is sacred from what is not sacred. And one of them raises his hand and says, "Teacher, teacher, it is when you could tell your neighbor's barn from your neighbor's house. That is when the new dawn comes." And another student raises his hand and says, "No, it is when you could tell the neighbor's cow from the neighbor's horse. That is when the new day comes." And a third one raises his hand and says, "Teacher, It is when you could tell the neighbor's dog from the neighbor's goat. That is when the new day has come. And the teacher looks into each of their faces and takes time to see each one and says, "No, my students." It is when you can look into the face of another, the person you don't understand, the person you judged, the person who frustrates you, the person who you would even call your enemy. And in that space, and in that face, you see there your own humanity. It is when we see our humanity reflected back at us in one another. That is truly when the new day dawns. Let us celebrate that new day. I invite you to rise in body as you do in spirit to sing hymn 38, Morning Has Broken. Rosh Hashanah, please be seated. Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, is like dawn breaking after a long, cold winter night. Let us give thanks for the new opportunities it brings, for new and deeper relationships it offers, for the larger vision to which it summons us. Let us celebrate its possibilities and its accompanying responsibilities. In the spirit of this new year, let us remember our laments of the time of Tish B'Av and lift up our gratitude for being brought into this time of hope, renewal, birth, possibility. Before we taste the sweetness promised in this new year, let us draw lessons from the past before the old year is wholly gone. Let us remember the old patterns, cruelties, calamities that we lamented just a few moments ago, and make a commitment to ourselves, our children, to each other, and to the world itself, to the God and all that we find holy, that we will devote ourselves to creating a new world, freed of the marks of evil and violence that formed the world in the years past. Tikkun Olam in Hebrew, let's repair the world. Remember, everything you do, every prayer you utter, every intention you form, every act of compassion you provide ripples out from the center of your being to the end of time. You set patterns for the world. Let the shofar awaken our commitment to creating patterns of joy and justice. Let it call you, me, us all to Tikkun Olam, repairing the world.
Teruah, the call to battle is sounded. Join the struggle against evil and suffering. Give of your bread to those who hunger. Give of your strength to those who stumble. Give of your time to the lonely and forsaken. Heal the wounded, comfort the bereaved. Let us hearken to the Teruah's call to action. For in our hands, in our hearts, and in our minds are the means for building a better world, for doing the work of Tikkun Olam, and for hastening the day when all will hear the sound of the great shofar of liberation.